Why can't I see myself? All right, we'll just wait a couple of minutes for the others. Can you hear me? Okay, I can't hear anybody. Hello? Okay, yeah, that's what I figure. I'm just going to go back out and come back in again because for some reason my camera is not working. I'll be right back. Okay. Can you hear me now? But you still can't see me, I don't think. Just give me 1 second. Tutor. Seriously. Okay, I'm having a problem with my camera, but for some reason it's switched on but not showing. But if you can hear me, let me just can somebody reply if they can hear me? Okay. And if you can see the presentation. Okay, just give me one more second, please. Okay, so that camera's working there. Okay, I think you can hear me. If you can hear me, can you just let me know? You can hear, but you can't see. Okay. Let me just change the setting here. Okay, I'm going to try and relaunch one more time. If that's okay, and see if that works. If not, we'll just continue with the sound. So let me relaunch one more time. Okay, no, that's not working. Okay, you can hear me, but you can't see me, is what I understand. If that's okay, please give me a thumbs up. Let's continue with the lesson. This is business communication, qualified level 3, certificate in business management, and this is our fourth session in this course. Can you just indicate that you can hear me again, please? Juliana, you've been very good. Maybe you can let me know. Okay, thank you. All right, so what I want to do is just to sort of briefly recap on the course, and I will just touch on the definition again in a minute. And then we're going to go through the fourth element of the course, which is knowing how to communicate information using appropriate methods. And we'll describe, that will involve describing how organizations use electronic and non-electronic methods to communicate business information, both internally and externally. Obviously, you're only hearing me now, but hopefully we can get through with the slides, and you can see what I, well, from the slides you can get the lesson. All right, so far in this course, we've talked about the different types of business information, and we've talked about how organizations can use those types of information for different purposes, and we've talked about what some of those purposes are and what the different types of communications are. And we also, in the last session, touched a bit on legal and ethical issues in regards to information and communication. So just to go back and to recap from session 1, where we defined communication as the exchange of facts, ideas, opinions, or emotions by or between two or more persons. So we also defined it as the process of passing information and understanding from one person to another. So if I just highlight a couple of key words there. So communication is a process of passing information and also understanding, right? And it is an exchange of facts, ideas, or opinions or emotions. So those are the key elements of communication. On the one hand, yes, of course, it's a process involving some inputs, some sort of processing of those inputs and the outputs. Ideally, that means that, you know, information is passed and it is understood by the recipient. And when we talk about business communications, then we talk about facts which are provided or learned about a business or about its internal or its external environments, about what it's setting out to do and how it plans to get there. And therefore, it allows people in business to make decisions about everyday elements of business. So from, you know, what to do with this purchase or with this sale, how to resolve this customer complaint, how to deal with this difficult employee, how to deal with this very positive employee, how to, you know, deal with banks or funding agencies. So it allows business managers to make decisions and to process some of those decisions, you know, in order to plan and to control all aspects of their business. So that's kind of what we positioned communication as. And then we talked about a communications process, an actual process for the actual communication of information. So right now, I'm the sender here. This is me. I'm the sender of communication at the moment because this is pretty much a one-way system. However, as we've seen, Juliana, particularly, you've responded and let me know that you're able to hear me, but you can't see me. So, but in this case, I'm the sender of the communication. So when I'm communicating now, what I'm trying to figure out is what's the best way for me to structure or encode my message, figure out some way to encode what I'm trying to convey to you, which is around communication and communication in business, and to structure a message in such a way. So in this case, the message is structured around PowerPoint presentation and my explanation through those slides. So I've worked out this is how I want to communicate the information and knowledge about business communications, and the channel that we're using for this is this online learning portal that we're all joined, that you signed up to use, and therefore, so you've got my slides and you're hearing my voice. Unfortunately, you can't see me. We'll try and fix that for the next session, but that's the channel that we're using. And then you're the recipient of this channel, on this channel, of the message I've structured. And hopefully you're able to decode my slides and my description and my explanations in such a way so that you understand the message that I'm really trying to get across. That's the communication process. And it's the same process when dealing with a relative, when dealing with a difficult child, when dealing with a boss, when dealing with a colleague at work, when dealing with a team member on a football team or a hockey team, when politicians are dealing with voters. So it's the same basic idea, that there's a sender who has to figure out what's the message and how best to structure and encode that message, and what's the most opportune channel to use to ensure that that communication is received and decoded effectively. And the challenge we have with all of this, of course, is trying to cope with the noise, the barriers that are out there that distract from the message. So, for example, if you're sitting in this session going through this module with me, and you're sitting in a quiet room and you've got headphones on and you're able to focus on the screen, there's much better chance of you getting the message that I'm trying to convey than if you're looking at this on a phone, standing in a subway carriage, you know, which is fairly full of people being jostled about, and you're trying to, you know, plug into this to the situation, to this lesson, in a very noisy, moving environment. So, you know, that's the effect of noise on the communication process and the channels chosen. So, bearing that sort of definition in mind, and that sort of process in mind, we're sort of focusing on business communications, on the functions and responsibilities of people in business. And we sort of talked about this the last day in terms of business being this sort of core process around taking inputs and using them in some sort of core business process to have outputs at the end of the day. And And so if we follow that yellow core box as being the sort of the core business process, and I don't mind if you're in a store, if you're in a computer company or a web design house or a manufacturing facility, you know, it's the same core process that we're involved in, that's involved in the business. And there may be a number of processes sequenced in that, but it's that idea of taking inputs and achieving outputs. But around all of that, we have a whole number of stakeholders who are influenced by and who influence and contribute to that process. People like government or business owners or customers, of course, are very important, as are suppliers, bankers, regulators potentially, maybe the unions if the workforce is unionized, the management of the business, the competitors. They're all stakeholders in one way or another. And their engagement with the core activity of the business may be in the form of direct communication, indirect communication, formal, informal, written, electronic, non-electronic. So, you know, they may communicate, and those sort of communication elements are for a whole range of activities. So we might talk about pay slips to staff, orders to suppliers, bank statements from bankers, compliance reports to regulators, product specifications to users, invoices to customers, audits which are then used by owners, produced by management and used by owners. So there's a whole range of different communication elements involved in there. And those green boxes that I put on the slide, they all tend to be sort of paper or written communication elements. There are, of course, a whole range of non-written. So there's verbal, there's non-verbal communication elements that can be part of the mix as well. So it's in this sort of environment with all of these different stakeholders that we're looking at the purpose and the process and the effectiveness of communication. And that's what we're trying to deal with and trying to achieve. So let's deal with non-electronic communication first of all. So non-electronic communication, well, we're talking about stuff that does not involve phones or faxes or emails, etc., etc. So we could be talking about letters or books or other elements of non-verbal communication. So starting with the first element here, with this picture up here on the left. Sorry, 1 second. Let me just highlight that. So first of all, we're talking about, you know, non-electronic communication, which can be simply face-to-face communication. Okay. 1 second. No. So if we're talking about face-to-face communication, well, you know, this could be anything from meeting a customer across a till, across a cash register, meeting a customer on a shop floor, meeting a customer in a restaurant, in a Starbucks or a coffee house, meeting a customer in a marketplace, and literally having that face-to-face communication. It can be face-to-face between a boss and a subordinate, between colleagues at work, you know, handing over pieces of work. You know, here I've done this sub-assembly, I've made a sub-assembly which is going to fit into the bigger piece that you're making. Maybe you're putting engines together on a car, and I've put together the sub-assembly around the starting motor, you know, or it could be something in a print facility. So, you know, I'm taking what you've produced as a print plate or a layout, and putting that on the machine to, if I'm not dealing with digital print, obviously, putting it up, loading it up onto the printing press so that we can run the printing job. So non-electronic face-to-face communication is something we do all day, every day. We're not doing it here because the camera's not working, and because obviously we're remote in terms of electronic communication. But if this was a classroom, I'd also be looking at you all, and I'd be communicating with each of you as well as you collectively. I would be making eye-to-eye contact where possible with different people around the room at different stages. One, to make sure that you're getting the message I'm trying to communicate, that I'm recognizing that you're actually understanding what I'm saying. 2, to drive home the importance of the engagement, and 3, to make sure that you're engaged and you're paying attention. if I'm dealing with a sales presentation, I may well be looking for those sort of engagements to understand, am I being effective in my communication? Am I losing your interest? There are things like we talk about an elevator pitch. An elevator pitch, I don't know if you've heard the term. Let me just type it here, ELEVATO, elevator pitch. So an elevator pitch, actually I should put that over here. So we might talk about an elevator pitch in a sales meeting or in a business development meeting, which is literally refers to the 30 seconds you may be together in an elevator with somebody, where you've got 30 seconds to explain your idea, to get them on board, to get their interest. And again, that's going to be face-to-face communication. And that is as old as we have actually had language, or even before language. Face-to-face, that idea of engaging directly with somebody. Beyond that, of course, we have written communication. So if I highlight this, when we're talking about written communication, so that example on the screen there is a letter from Theodore Roosevelt, so the President of the United States of America in around 1908, 1910. And the letter itself isn't important. It's the fact that it's actually a letter. It's a typed document, or could be a handwritten document, whereby there's a communication in the letter using words and syntax and grammar, etc. It's addressed to somebody, and it's a form of me then communicating with somebody, or communicating with you or somebody else, over time and over distance. Now, this sort of non-electronic communication, so a letter, which of course we use as email now, but if we just talk about a written communication, this is a real innovation about 300 or 400 or 500 years ago, or longer, obviously. Sorry, what am I saying? Back thousands of years, because it's a way for us to communicate a message that survives over time. So it's a way to set down what our message is. So think back to that process. We're saying, okay, well, what's the message that I want you to understand? So who are my audience? What's the best language to use? What's the best pitch of level to use? What's the message I want to get across to you? And the more I consider that, the more effective that message is going to be. But obviously a letter has become very much a standard business tool until recently, because before email, of course, this was the primary way that a message could be constructed and sent in such a way that there's a record of what the message is. So I told you on this date to do this thing. That's the power of a written message. I told you, I conveyed the meaning to you, I told you there was a problem, I identified to you something that needed to be done to avoid some sort of tragedy happening, and it's in writing on this date. That's the power of a written communication, and it's really important. And of course, beyond that, then we have, sorry, let me get rid of the box. And the box. So then we might talk about books. Books, of course, are another form of written communication, non-electronic, unless you're reading it on a Kindle. But a book is just, of course, a way of putting a really long message together, a whole or a sequence of messages, or a much broader communication about a topic. Of more recent relevance, of course, will be something like this. Again, we're past this now, but this is a computer printout using continuous paper, whereby reports are run from a computer system generating some sort of printout, which preserves as a paper record some of the information contained in the system. So when I first started work, I used to work with a computer printer manufacturer, and my job was stock planning, was to specify what are the parts that we need to order so that the machines can be built on the production line. So I would get a printout of this, of a document like this every month, which would be a forecast over the next 12 months as to what products were going to be required to be produced. So a marketing plan, effectively. And from that, the computer would break down out of that plan of 10 units of this or 100 units of this product are in May and 200 units in June, etc. It would break down what the piece part requirements were and produce this report of each piece part as to what the stock was, what the projected requirement was. Should have been off. My mistake, my bad. I'm saying we would have this printout report of all of these parts that had to be ordered, and it would come in a thick, 400 or 500 page printout, just like this piece here. And then I would be able to work through that. Thankfully, we don't do that anymore. The other aspect around non-electronic communication is non-verbal communication. So in every meeting we have these days, or in a lot of cases, we have a handshake. A handshake is seen as a form of greeting somebody. It's also a form of agreeing, yes, we've come to an agreement, we shake on it, so we share our understanding as to what the outcome of the meeting is. It's a way of closing off the meeting that we're having. And it may well be a way of finalizing an agreement with somebody. So that's a handshake. And it's a non-verbal, also non-electronic form of communication. But the last piece here, down here, of course, is the same person in different postures. And of course, we all know the importance of appearing positive in certain cases. So if you can imagine this person's in a job interview, starting from the left, well, this is not a good posture to be in a job interview situation. We're leaning forward, head on hands, looking bored or tired. A little bit better on the second version of that, a bit more animated in the third, but not looking at the interviewer. And finally in the fourth, up front, direct, looking at the interviewer, communicating directly with the interviewer. It's likely to form a much better impression than this first version over here. So, non-electronic communication also extends to not verbal communication. Everything that's that can add or detract from the message that you're trying to convey. So, if we talk about non-electronic communication, we're talking about a whole range of issues. I just wanted to show you this at the end of the third session, which was a picture of President Lyndon Johnson of the US in about 1964, 1965. This is him here on the taller gentleman, and a guy called Abe Fortas. Johnson was known very much for the Johnson treatment. It was his way of communication. He was a big, imposing figure, and he liked to use his presence and his communication style to drive his agenda, to drive his message. So in this case, you see him, he's leaning in, he's occupying Fortas's space, he's impressing upon Fortas that, look, I'm the boss, I'm the president, and he's communicating with him, and it may be jovial, it might be entertaining, but he's also very much setting the scene, being dominant and saying, this is the way it's going to be. He's exerting his physical presence as a way of helping influence Abe Fortas. What's interesting about this is that Abe Fortas was somebody that he actually put on the Supreme Court. So, I'm not saying that this was specifically before or after, but Abe Fortas was a Supreme Court justice who, of course, under the US system should be a separate branch of government, not influenced by the executive or the legislative branch. But Johnson very much applied the Johnson treatment across the board, very much used his physical imposing presence, his communication style, his verbal communication to impress upon others as to what they should or shouldn't do that he wanted. So when we talk about non-electronic communication, I'm sure we've all had experience of somebody who will exert some sort of influence like this, and it can be imposing, and it may not be effective long term. It may not be useful in building long-term relationships, but it can be used to get us to do things that we don't necessarily bought into, just by being subject to such treatment. I'm not saying it's ethical or not. It's just it is what it was. This is another picture of Johnson here in the background when he was vice president with Kennedy, President Kennedy, and you know, very much it was part of the electoral ticket as to secure the presidency, to win the 1960 election, was having a northern Democrat with a southern Democrat. Johnson was from Texas, but even in his campaigning style, you know, he used that treatment. He used communication very creatively, let's say. There's a famous story told about in one particular electoral race where he wanted one of his staffers to circulate a terrible story about one of his opponents, you know, something that I couldn't repeat here, but he wanted this message to get out. And his staffer said, well, but you know that's not true. You know, we're saying something that's not true about your opponent. And Johnson's response was, I know. I just want to make him deny it. So by forcing him to deny it, forces him to actually discuss the issue that we know he's not guilty of, but it creates this negative impression. So Johnson was a master communicator in some ways. But that's non-electronic communication. And that's one of the issues here. You know, when we get into electronic communication, we have to adapt our style because we're talking about a different type of communication, a different approach in many ways to verbal or non-verbal communication. Because with electronic communication, everything can be tracked, everything can be preserved. So it means that Johnson's approach, you know, can be possibly more difficult to achieve in today's world, with the fundamental exception of Mr. Trump, of course, who seems to have mastered a way to use Twitter and social media to connect with a base of voters and to maintain that base. But he's done so in such a way that he's written off everybody else and he doesn't communicate for anybody else. He's always going to his base. It remains to be seen what effect that will have long term. Okay, so that brings us on to electronic communications. So if we start with electronic communications, and you know, we start up here obviously with one of the first elements, not the first, but one of the first elements being, of course, the telephone. Now, I was making this comment to somebody recently. In modern offices, of course, very rarely do we see telephones on desks anymore because everybody jumps straight to the mobile. So, you know, you've got your mobile handset, your smartphone, and to a certain extent that has eradicated the need for a desk phone in some markets, not everywhere. And there's a comfort to having a wired connection that you can rely on in case networks go down. But there's no doubt that the telephone revolutionized communications as well. So developed by Alexander Graham Bell, of course, has been a mechanism for communicating over distance by converting a voice communication into an electrical signal, and having a decoding device on the other end. So you know, it's an element of technology introduced into that core communication process. But without getting into the technology of it, it's the power of electronic communication that has become so much more important. Of course, we all have a number now, which is effectively our connection to the world. And with that number, whether it's on a desk phone or a mobile phone or a cell phone, whichever you want to call it, it means that we can be contacted by somebody from almost anywhere in the world. And think of that power. We can contact somebody from almost anywhere in the world now, which means we can have a direct, electronically enabled conversation with somebody. We still have the same problem around what's the message, what's the medium or the channel that we're going to use, and how to construct the message, and even what language to use in that message to make ourselves understood. But we have the ability to have that conversation, and that's crucial. Of course, beyond that, then we have the smartphone. Now, of course, the original cell phone was just a mobile version of the wired phone. So, you know, that enabled us to have those communications. It developed with the introduction of SMS messaging, short message text. which of course yielded out Twitter and everything else. But the smartphone of course, is so powerful now because it's not just a phone anymore. It's a multifunction device. It's a phone, it's a clock, it's a diary, it's a contacts tool, it's an email engine, it's a social media interface, it's a camera, it's a photo storage facility, it's everything. So, you know, over the coming 5 to 10 years, your handset is going to be your primary interface with the electronic world. You know, we're already seeing a convergence, if you like, of phones and tablet computers. And, you know, that sort of capability is only going to improve. And the handset that you have now is actually a powerful mini computer in many ways. And that enables, of course, all of these things here, all of these apps, which create new channels, new mechanisms of electronic communication. The most important one, of course, by far, remains possibly email. Maybe not for much longer, but certainly email as a form of electronic communication has been a massive enabler. So with the advent of email in the early 1990s, or 1980s, potential date, 1980s, we have the ability to send a written message like a letter to a unique addressee who has an email address. So you all have an email address, which is what you use to access this session. It's your unique email address. But with your email engine, whether it's on your Apple or your laptop or your phone or your whatever, you know, you have access to a direct communication mechanism where somebody can send you a communication. It's stored, it's there waiting for you to open. It gives you information. It requires you to answer questions. It sets you up for a meeting. It creates an order for a product. It enables you to sell a contract. It enables you to employ somebody or to engage with somebody. So it's a mechanism which is effectively an electronic version of letters. And we talked about the power of letters in the past. So it is it has been a massive change for business. So the migration away from paper letters and paper statements and communications to electronic communications has been incredible. I'm not sure what it's like in Malaysia or Korea or Japan, but certainly here there's more and more of a push to get your electricity statement, your phone statement, your internet connectivity account statement, your bank statements electronically delivered, or certainly accessed electronically, but with an email prompt for many of those things. So email has been probably the most important electronic enabling tool. Goes hand in hand, of course. You have to have an interface or a phone or a tablet or a computer to access it, and that it just doesn't appear in the air. But once you have the hardware, the software, the application element is extremely powerful. What would be really interesting to see is whether some of these elements here replace email as being the primary interface. Now we've seen how some of these have we've been talking an awful lot lately in the media and the news world about things like Facebook and Twitter, and because of their broader capability of sharing information, almost like marketing tools and marketing channels. And we'll talk about marketing in the next hour. And Instagram, of course, goes with that too. So it's a way for you or I or a business to communicate to a bunch of vested, to a network of people who have some sort of connection with us. Either they're following us or they're connected, or we can use advertising to get to them. But and it's not just a one-way system. It creates a conversational dialogue system. The only problem with it, of course, is that it's in public view. So strip out the private or the direct messages. Everything is in the public view, and this is where Trump has really learned has found a way to make massive inroads in terms of connecting with people. But they're only some of the apps. What's interesting is obviously Skype. Now Skype has probably gone backwards lately, but for a while Skype was a huge change in the electronic communications world because it created the ability to have a phone conversation using your computer. So it's that convergence of technologies creating that opportunity to say, well, okay, now not only do I have to have a phone or a mobile phone, now I need a Skype account as a way of expanding my business, or even within our business. Skype, of course, though, has much better cost implications. But and with the voice over IP engagement, you've got Skype being able to talk to a phone or a cell phone, so it creates that sort of opportunity as well. Hangouts, this one here is a Google version of Skype. But what I think is most interesting is how WhatsApp is becoming more used all the time. I'm not sure what sort of penetration it may have in the Far East. But certainly WhatsApp is becoming a useful tool now. And again, it's another engine, another mechanism to communicate with people. But what you find here, an awful lot of Skype or WhatsApp is being used within organizations or within teams and clubs in particular to form a specific WhatsApp group for this particular project or this campaign or this competition, and putting the players or the team members together in this connection so that everybody in this particular, and it could be from 3 people to 25 people, whatever it is, being connected, being able to have a shared communication stream. It's not public in that it's not Twitter or Facebook. It's not individual like email and requiring an email engine and for bigger communication and so on. But it's a very short capability to share ongoing immediate messaging about our project or our team so that we can all have the same mindset and the same awareness of what needs to be done. So electronic communication includes all of these elements. So when we got away from the sort of definition of communication as being this transferring of information to, these are all the mechanisms. We've had the non-electronic and now we've got the electronic, and these are all the mechanisms that we can use to communicate. And in one sense that creates a problem because we talk about channel overload, right? What's the best way to communicate? Is it by Facebook or Twitter or WhatsApp or Instagram or phone or Skype or email? There's all of these elements, and we end up with having slates of communication channels with different people over different mechanisms. So part of how we pull these together is going to be interesting. I didn't mention Shopify yet because Shopify is more than just a communication channel. It's a way of monetizing online trading. So there are other options other than Shopify. Shopify is just the one I'm familiar with. But it's a way for us to have a website, which of course is a form of electronic communication, and to leverage sales through that website of our products or our services by having a Shopify or some other application. So it's a business enabler. So on top of the communications tools, we have something like Shopify, which enables us to have the communication, but in a structured format to enable us to have an electronic sale. So where we never actually speak to anybody, but we have an order, we have a confirmation, we have a funds exchange leading to a requirement to send a product or provide a service. So with all of that, why are we talking about ethical issues? I suppose one of the challenges, and I showed you this at the end of the 3rd session as being an example of some of the famous whistleblowers. So Edward Snowden, Helen Evans from Oxfam, Frank Serpico from the New York Police Department, Karen Silkwood, who's with nuclear power processing, and Jeffrey Wygant, who sort of blew the whistle on big tobacco. So one of the things with all of this communication is, what do we use it for? How do we use it? And we need to sort of be clear that we have to follow ethical guidelines. Okay. And each of those have their own powerful stories, I suppose. So without going into those, it's understanding this idea that, it's not just communicating anything to everybody. It's part of that process about deciding what the message is and how we communicate it. So what I wanted to do then was to talk about some examples of situation, and then to run through a complete example from my own perspective. So the communication situation that we have to deal with, or we should be dealing with, or we do deal with, maybe around managing people in terms of recruitment and selection, performance appraisals, grievance and discipline processing, training and development, managing situations such as managing change in an organization, managing conflict, even managing celebration, or just managing processes in terms of our core operations, the sales process, the planning process, managing our relationship with stakeholders, managing our business operations, our production processes, or managing how we provide services. These are all communication situations that we have to consider and deal with. And we're going to talk about things like the HR piece. I think we have a class tomorrow on that. We'll talk about some of the other elements and cover of other modules, but they're all elements where we have to figure out what we have to communicate and when we have to communicate it. So, for example, we might look at some of these elements in terms of sales or performance appraisal or strategy or resolving conflict. And, in each of these cases, there has to be a name. So if we're talking about a sales